Mr. President, what a pleasure to see you once again.
It is my pleasure to join your show again, Tian Wei.
Thank you so much for taking your time out of your extremely busy schedule right now. Now, Mr. President, as you know, foster high-quality BRICS partnership, usher in a new era for global development. That is the theme for BRICS Summit this year. So how are the new development bank and yourself contributing to these discussions at the summit?
Tian Wei, that's a great question because I think the topic for the BRICS Summit this year is a very precise one. This is exactly what the world needs, more quality in terms of its development. So I think the new development bank provides to that objective in many different ways. One contribution, of course, comes in the form of the new development bank being a privileged platform for cooperation. The original members have very different backgrounds, different political systems. They're even in different stages of economic development, but they share this common goal of providing resources for infrastructure and sustainable development. So in spite of their differences, they come together and they build on interests in which they shared views. Of course, the more resources, the more quality projects that we have are providing to that objective of the summit. The new development bank, of course, is also a very useful tool for shared experiences. Sometimes a solution that's being implemented successfully in Brazil can also be implemented in South Africa. And now in the case of the new development bank, even beyond what happens at the BRICS level, we have, as you know, embarked on a process of membership expansion. We have admitted new countries. So hopefully by this very year of 2022, the first new projects in these new member countries will also be implemented. And once again, Tian Wei, development itself is changing. Development itself, it's changing. So even if you're thinking about traditional areas of infrastructure, as basic as water and sanitation, they're more and more embedded by technology. And the new development bank is very well connected to the state of the art that's happening across the world so that we can engage with our member countries, engage with the institutions so that when projects are being devised, they can use the best practices, the best technologies, even in those basic areas. I think that's what quality development is all about.
You know, there are so many on the hands of a new development bank. How would you describe your focus right now, especially when the world is changing dramatically around us?
Yeah, I think there is an emphasis. It's only natural. I mean, in the next couple of weeks, Tian Wei, the new development bank will celebrate its 7th anniversary. So it's a child. It's a 7-year-old child. And it's natural that in the beginning, you focus on projects in which you can have scale and in which you can build your portfolio. It's only natural. And as you evolve as an institution, there is a very strong emphasis on the quality of what you do. There's this expression that I love so much. And I think you had asked me about the focus. Perhaps our most important priority now is the development impact. So whether the development impact is coming from a project of $100 million or $500 million, the important thing is that the development impact is exponentiated, that you reach the greatest quality, the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. How do you get that? So you get that with more technology. You get that by tapping different sources of funding. You get that by working very closely with different actors in your countries. And you get that also by building a talent-intensive institution, which is what we are doing at the new development bank. I mean, since I took office as president, we have set up a department for ESG. We have set up an independent evaluation office in the field of operations. So we are becoming more complex as an institution. We're becoming more sophisticated. To summarize, the best possible answer to your question, the focus of the development of the new development bank at this point is the development impact it can generate to its member countries.
Mr. President, you know, the new development bank aspires to be the premier development bank of the developing countries, the emerging economies. And yet, at this moment, when countries are talking about inflation and even crisis, for the rest of the year and probably leading up to next year, how do you look at the debate and discussion, philosophically even, about risks and benefits, about risks and efficiencies?
You know, I was at the World Economic Forum a couple of weeks ago when there was a lot of pessimism towards mature economies, a lot of pessimism geared towards emerging economies as well. And I think much of that pessimism comes from the confluence of four factors. So one, we're still living the effects of the worst pandemic since the Spanish flu earlier in the 20th century. We are perhaps experiencing some of the biggest economic challenges since the Great Depression of the 1930s. There are the geopolitical tensions in Europe that are perhaps very high and perhaps the highest since the end of World War II. We have inflation. Some economists call it stagflation, similar to the ones that we had in the late 1970s, beginning of the 1980s. So I think the convergence of all of these four factors end up bringing about a lot of pessimism. But you see, I like to look at things structurally. I think this four characteristics that I have mentioned to you are not the most important story out there. The most important story out there is that more and more, even in a tough year like 2022, like 2020 was tough, 2021 was tough, 2022 was tough. A couple of 3 years that were very challenging for emerging economies have not changed something structurally, which is that the emerging economies are taking more and more bigger and bigger slices of the global GDP pie, right? I always love to make this comparison. This is true about 2022 again. If you add up the gross domestic product of the traditional G7 for 2022, measured at purchasing power parity terms, we're talking about $42 trillion. Whereas if you size up the E7, China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, Mexico, and Turkey, that's $53 trillion in gross domestic product measured at purchasing power parity. So this trend is continuing. In one of the sessions that I participated in a World Economic Forum on Tian Wei, people were talking about a likely recession in 2022. But look, India is going to grow in between 8.5 and 9%. China, even with the punctual lockdowns, is going to grow anywhere between 4.5 and 5. Brazil is going to grow north than 2%. South Africa is going to grow north than 2%. You look at other emerging economies, Indonesia close to 6, Egypt close to 6, Bangladesh, a new member country, is going to grow north of 7%. So an important portion of the emerging economies are actually going to experience very robust growth, even in a tough year like 2022. So that is a structural that continues to happen, and I think it shows that the new development bank has the right strategy focus on its mind. Because if we are about becoming the premier development institution for emerging economies, and emerging economies are increasing its relative importance in the global GDP, I think we are very well positioned to play that role, and this is what we set out to do.
The New Development Bank is not only working on the infrastructure projects, but also trying to do it in many innovative ways. One of it, Mr. President, if I can, is to work with the local currencies. According to your latest plan, 2022 to 2026, 30% of the projects are likely to be financed by local currencies. Now, as the president of the New Development Bank, how do you see the debate about using local currencies? What is the benefits and what is the risks of using it? And how do you see the pace that you set for yourself, 30%?
Yeah, well, yeah, so 30% is our goal. We already have a sizable portion of our operations established in local currencies. Of course, here, given the size of the Chinese economy, a significant portion of that is taking place in China. You see, it's only natural, Tian Wei, because as the emerging economies, and to touch my earlier point, are becoming more and more relevant, it's only natural that the monetary importance, the currency in which many of these deals are set, are done in currencies that emerge from these countries themselves. So this is what we want to do. Sometimes, of course, the pace does not follow the speed of the change in the economic landscape, because a number of agreements, including some that are not only of a transactional nature, but of a legal nature, have to be established as well. But I see that as a non-stopping trade. On the trend. On the other hand, of course, we see many advantage in establishing local currency deals to protect from the oscillations of hard currencies and any sort of exchange rate volatility that might not be to the benefit of the projects themselves.
Mr. President, earlier you talked about the legal issues. What exactly are you referring to?
Maybe you have international agreements that are necessary. You have to have understandings involving central banks of different currencies, monetary authorities. So this is something that goes, for example, for you in terms of convertibility, what kind of currencies you're going to have in one particular basket to be put to the options of potential clients. So it's very important that the cooperation that you see in the different levels of BRICS also extends, for example, to this kind of conversation.
And this is very crucial, according to you, right?
I think it's an important issue. I think the quality of the projects, the outreach of the benefit that you think of one project is the most important thing. Once again, development impact is the name of the game, not only for the NDB, but for all multilateral development banks. You see, although there is a lot of talk about less resources available, the truth of the matter, Tian Wei, is that for a long time now we've seen this disconnect between, on the one hand, an incredible amount of resources that are parked either at low interest rates or that are looking for opportunities for attractive uses of capital. And then you have a sort of dearth or absence of projects that can actually absorb those resources and turn and provide a return. The development banks are there to establish that bridge. The more bridges that we establish, the better. So once again, the most important consideration that we take here is development impact.
One of the goals of the New Development Bank, of course, is to support the global south in the infrastructure. But if you look at the realities of the global south, Mr. President, one has to ponder upon the fact that when crises come, the developing countries and emerging economies becoming extremely vulnerable, particularly the least developed economies. So how do you read this reality now, particularly?
I think what you mentioned there, Tian Wei, is true, and we actually have to differentiate some emerging markets from others. And let me give you one example. Yes, these are very challenging times, but for Brazil, for example, right now has hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure projects that have been already contracted because of the structural reforms that took place this past 3 years. So although, once again, the international scenario is a very challenging one, the midterm outlook for infrastructure investment in a country like Brazil is a very positive one. Look at the case of India. Although India for many years has lagged behind in terms of infrastructure investment, what you've seen over this past 6-7 years is truly remarkable in terms of roads, in terms of railways, in terms of urban transportation. By the way, we finance some of that as well in India. So infrastructure investment and the attention of international investors that want to partner with countries like India or South Africa or Brazil is increasing. Look at the case of China. Not only now, but infrastructure has always played a key role in the expansion of businesses, and even playing some counter-cyclical roles whenever there was an international crisis. Infrastructure being there in China is one of the drivers of economic recovery or economic expansion. I was telling a friend the other day, Tian Wei, that the first time I was in China, that was April 2004, so about 18 years ago. And the change that we have seen over this 18 years is truly remarkable. But I think you were right. What I said about the E7 and their economic might when compared to the G7 does not necessarily follow in other least developing countries. There is a lot of vulnerability out there, and I think the international community should come together to provide those resources and for those countries that are in a more fragile situation.
One of the reasons for fragility might be related to the inflation. Of course, Mr. President, earlier you already touched on that question, but that is likely to be a daunting challenge for many economies right now, particularly the developing countries, usually who do not have the capability to decide on some of the most important issues, for example, when it comes to global governance. So, Mr. President, what is, when you are doing research for your members and beyond, what are some of the best advice and tools they could have right now?
I think to have a balanced approach is the most favorable one, because sometimes people like to think in binary ways. So are you going to tighten monetary policy, or are you going to do something radical in terms of fiscal policy? Are you going to sacrifice growth completely for the sake of taming inflation, or are you going to have growth come hand in hand with an inflation that's nearly out of control? So a balanced approach there is very important. And once again, as we move away from COVID, as supply chains are restored, as say logistics also come back to something closer to a normality, that will also help to bring inflation down. But one thing that is a little more structural, and I would say it's even a little philosophical here, you used the word philosophy before in our conversation, Tian Wei, so I'm going to go back to it now, is globalization. Globalization this past 40 years has been a very powerful force in keeping global inflation down, right? Because you have so many real-time solutions to the provision of goods and services, because the world is connected, inflation was kept down. So more globalization brings about not only more prosperity, but I see as well more economic stability over time. As these big emerging economies have more of a sophisticated role in value networks, that hopefully will also bring help bring inflation down, because the levels of globalization, the sophistication of globalization is also evolving.
Mr. President, let me also focus on another issue that the New Development Bank has been aspiring to, which is gender equity in the workforce. You are planning for 40% at least of females in the workforce of the New Development Bank. Tell me more about it, and what does that mean to the culture of your institution and the culture of the members of New Development Bank?
Oh, these are very important for us, Tian Wei. Gender balance in our workforce, nationality balance in our workforce, people that are trained and equipped to perform different roles, having a very open approach. These are all, I think, key ingredients to building a talent-intensive institution. Right now, we have about a third of our workforce who are women. We want to change that to 40% over this next cycle of 5 years, maybe hopefully even more than that. We have nearly doubled the number of females who are now taking a managerial role. So gender balance, gender opportunities, a key priority for us. Nationality as well. I mean, not only we have the 5 BRICS, but now we have, as I mentioned to you, become a 9-member bank. Hopefully, very soon we'll be able to announce new members. So we want to make sure that as we walk into the beautiful headquarters of the New Development Bank in Shanghai, which, by the way, is one of the most green and sustainable buildings in the world, you will see this diversification, this variety of backgrounds, of talents, of people, gender, nationality, which truly makes for a great global institution.
We see, Mr. President, the world has been from time to time come to consensus about what is the logic, what is the way forward, and how should we get there. And yet, when apparent crisis happen, sometimes those visions could be blurred. Now, how do you see what is the way out? How to make sure that the New Development Bank will always be able to be clear on its vision for development for the global South?
Yeah, so once again, Tian Wei, although the challenges we have today are huge, and it's almost a common sense to say that they are unprecedented, right? If we go back 100 years ago, there was the fall of the New York stock market in 1929, and then in the 30s, you have the rise of totalitarianism in Europe, and you have the beginning of World War II. In the 1940s, you have World War II. In the 1950s, you have the unfolding of the Cold War. In the 1960s, you have a number of geopolitical conflicts, wars in Vietnam. In the 1970s, you have the two oil shock crisis. In the 1980s, you have the crisis in Latin America, debt. In the 1990s, you have a war in the Balkans. In the beginning of the 2000s, you have 9/11 and you have the war on terrorism. Later in the decade, you have the Great Recession. So you see, although the challenges that we're living now are unprecedented, every decade presents its difficulties and the obstacles that we have to overcome. The important thing is that structurally, the change is happening. Emerging economies are becoming more and more relevant. They're doing more business with each other. There's more cooperation. So the New Development Bank is another player in that orchestra. The New Development Bank is another musician in the band, trying to play the beautiful song, the beautiful music of cooperation, and putting resources there for infrastructure and sustainable development. We are not there alone. We are part of a bigger group, of a bigger crowd, but we are playing that role, and it's very constructive. Even if you limit your analysis to the universe of development institutions, when you think of the needs, especially in the emerging world for infrastructure and what development banks can do, the gap is still very large. So the more players you have out there, like the New Development Bank, the more chances we have of succeeding. And that is why we are so hopeful for the future. And although everything is very difficult, every challenge is there, the vision is very important. The vision for building a premier development institution for emerging economies is holding on. I think it's expanding, and it's being, reality is proving that the New Development Bank is indeed a very key player in this new scenario.
Where do you think the New Development Bank is? From 0 to 100, where is it?
You know, instead of putting it closer to 0 or putting it close to 100, I like to think of movable targets, right? So there's a sense of accomplishment. So for example, we've reached more than $30 billion of approvals. We now have projects in all of our member countries. Very soon we'll be implementing the first project in the new members. We're making strides forward in climate financing, in ESG, in the private sector. So there's a lot to celebrate. The mistake will be, because you have those things to celebrate, you say, well, I'm in a comfortable position. I'm going to put the institution in a kind of an inertial position now. So this is what we want. There must always be a sense of discomfort, of challenge, of things that are still to realize. On the other hand, there are so many difficulties coming from all parts. I mean, you've mentioned some here today. So inflation, pandemic, protectionism. So if you get paralyzed by the difficulties too, then you're making a mistake as well. So I want to say that we like where we're going to. We like the direction. We have a sense of direction. We have the right compass, and we have the right, I think, global positioning system. And we are happy with the way we are going, always knowing that we could have done things better, so that it keeps challenging us to perform better and better.